Hey everybody, today I'm taking a look at a game called Mischief, which is going to be launching on Kickstarter on the 1st of October 2024. Now this is a 2 to 4 player card game that takes around 30 minutes to play, designed by Dan Cassar, who is most famously known for designing Arboretum, which is one of my favourite card games of all time. Now before I get started on my review of this prototype edition of Mischief, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer, and if you use the link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. Okay, so before I go into the setup here, please be aware that this is a prototype copy of the game. The final version will come with a board instead of these cards, and also some of the card anatomy is going to be changed slightly to make the actual pertinent information a bit stronger and a bit clearer as compared to this prototype version. But this is what the setup is going to look like. Depending on the player count, you're going to have a number of these cards which depict these different kind of suits that are going to be in the game. So each of these cards, which represent these tables, come with two different types of card associated to it, like a light side and a dark side. So you can see in this table, we have the centaurs and the satyrs on the same table, and in each suit, there's going to be a card numbered from 1 to 5. Also, next to each table, there's going to be a face-down card from the main deck, which are going to get revealed as the game progresses. And on each one of these tables, there's going to be 3 tokens, 2 of these protection tokens and 1 of these kind of prank tokens of each type. There's going to be an invitation row to the side of the board, which is going to be extended as the game goes on, as these cards are revealed. And also these other tokens are going to be important for end game scoring. So at the start of the game, you're also going to get given 13 cards, which is going to be your entire hand of cards through the entire game. And some of those cards are going to get taken out of the game as well, so that you do not have perfect information. Okay, so let's talk about how the game works, and naturally, as you'd assume, the objective of the game is to score as many points as you can by collecting these tokens, but also by having influence over the final arrangement of the table. So you can see here that the game works in a somewhat tug-of-war style way, where each table you are going to be splaying out the cards matching that particular type. So you can see the satyrs at the moment have an influence of 3 as compared to the centaurs 0. So again, at the start of the game, you're going to seed the board somewhat, but that's going to get manipulated as the game goes on. Again, as well as collecting these tokens as the game goes on, which will give you victory points, there will be some end game victory points that are going to be quite a significant factor in terms of the scoring. So the way the game works is actually very simple, where you are going to play a card from your hand mandatorily, and then after that you can choose optionally to swap any card from your hand with a card from the invitational row. So there's only one at the moment, but you know that might extend as the game goes on, as I'll explain. So it's going to be difficult to do this with any kind of intelligent thinking, because I'm just kind of winging this, but let's just say I wanted to play this card here just because it's at the front. So this is the 4 dwarf card. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at the 4, or sorry, where the dwarfs are, and I'm going to play this card matching that spot, so like this. Now this actually triggers one of the ways to gain a token, because if you ever play a card or have a card that's higher than the card you just played on that arrangement, so you're going to do what's called like a protection. So the 4 is going to protect the 5, the 3 to protect the 4s, the 2s protect the 3s, and so on. And if that ever happens, you're going to gain that protection token. So again, I played the 4, which protects the 5, and therefore I'm going to gain this 2-pointer dwarf protection token. Now, if I was to do that again, say, for example, I played a 3 dwarf, which I'm not saying I do have, but I might do, I would flip this one over and lock it in place. And until that happens, that token is available to be stolen, because my opponent might want to play a 3 dwarf and they'll take that token from me. But again, if I do 2 in a row, or 2 without being broken by another player, then I'm going to lock it into place, and those points are going to be secured for me. Now, the importance of a card being protected comes down to the next mechanism, which is when you play a card of a matching number of the other side. So, let's say the next player chose to play this 4 troll card, I'm going to have a look if there's a 4 on the opposite side, which there is, if you remember the 4 dwarf I've just played, and I'm going to eliminate that card. So that would be protected if the card had a lower number than it on there. So if the 3 was there, then the 4 couldn't be eliminated. So in this example, I couldn't actually eliminate this 5 card because it's protected by the 4. So you're kind of working from the lower number up in terms of eliminating them. But in this example, the player has played the 4 troll card, therefore it would eliminate the unprotected 4 dwarf card from the game. And if you ever do that, of course you are weakening the dwarf state of play, but you're also going to take this prank token, and much like those protection tokens, if you ever play 2 of them in a row without being broken by another player, then you are going to flip it over to the locked side and secure those 5 points in place. Now, if you ever play a value 1 or a value 5 card, then you are going to add the card next to it to the invitation row. So let's just say this player wanted to play this 1 valued card next to the centaurs. They're going to reveal this card and add it to that row. Again, another option for me to swap a card from my hand with, because if you remember, the first thing you do is you play a card to one of these tables, and then after that you have the option to swap a card from the invitational row with one from your hand. So you're going to keep on playing cards, collecting tokens, removing other cards from the opposite side with pranks until the board will look something like this, where each player's collected a bunch of tokens and you've only got 5 cards remaining in your hand. And when you ever have 5 cards left, you are going to choose one of those cards to get rid of, essentially just to dump out of the game. So let's just say this person chose this one and this player chose this one to get rid of, discarding them completely. And then after that, one at a time, you're going to resolve these tables. So first thing you'll do is you'll calculate the influence on them. So you can see this one, the centaurs have a strength of 3, 4, 5, 6, as compared to the satyrs' strength of 7, 8, 9. So at the moment, the satyrs are winning by a couple of influence points. But this is where the cards remaining in your hand come into play, because each player is going to have a look if they've got any cards matching that table, and they're going to add that influence to those values. So in this example, only this player has a card matching that table with the massive strength 5 card, and this player doesn't have any at all. So this is actually going to swing the winner of this table in favour of the centaurs, because now this has overtaken it with the adding of this strength 5. And if that happens, or whoever's got a card matching that table and supporting the winning side, is going to get some of these victory tokens. And if the influence stayed the same as it was, so say for example the satyrs won that influence battle, then you'd get the dancing side as long as you had the lowest value in that particular card suit. So, if I had the 1 satyr strength, I would guarantee myself these 6 points. But because it flipped influence from the satyrs to the centaurs, then you're going to get even more points. And I'd get, this 10-point token like this, because there's been a surprise. And that is going to come down to who's played the highest card to swing that influence. Now, in this example, I was the only player to play a card, and it was the 5, so I would get those 10 points. But let's just say that my opponent had maybe the strength 3 card. It's not quite as good as my 5, but they'll at least get a kind of a runner-up prize with these additional points. So let's just resolve these remaining tables to help get a grip of how that rule works. So in this example, the goblins are looking strong compared to the sprites, no points at all. But in this example, this player has gone all in on the sprites to try and swing the influence into their favour, which they clearly have done. Now, this probably wouldn't be an optimal decision to make, but it shows you that if you flip the favour from the goblins all the way to the sprites, then this player, because they've got the highest value card, or in this example, the only player with any cards of that suit, they are going to get those bonus points. Again, it's going to be a surprise, so they're going to flip it over and get those 10 points. In this example, there's no runner-up either. Let's go on to the dwarf and the troll table. So in this example, the dwarfs have a strength of 8 compared to the trolls 4. Have we got any players that have the dwarf or the trolls? No, we don't at all. So this table is not going to be rewarding any points at all. And finally, we'll go on to the gnomes and the ogres. So we've got the gnomes of a strength 9 as compared to the strength 8 of the ogres. But in this example, this player was going to add another strength 5 to the gnomes. They've actually kept this one back just in case there's a backup as well, but it's still going to be stronger in favour of the gnomes. It's going to stay in control. They're going to stay in control, therefore they would only get the dance side of the token rather than the prank side or the surprise side. And that's how the game works, really. And now there is a slightly different rule where if you get points based on that mechanism with the 3s, you get some bonus points for those 3s as well, because they're kind of in the middle of the suit. And at the end of the game, once you've calculated all the scoring, you're going to calculate all of your points from your tokens as well. Well, that's it really. All your points from your tokens, big and small. And the player with the most victory points will be the winner. Okay, so let's share some thoughts on Mischief. And if you are familiar with Arboretum, you can probably tell that there is some crossover between these two games, especially with that key idea of cards remaining in your hand being just as important as the cards that you are playing. It adds a cool kind of dimension twist on the tug-of-war system where you can mislead your opponents into thinking that they're quite secure in making a certain character or a race of these fantasy characters win the table, where in reality you're holding on to those bigger cards and you can drastically swing the influence of that table, especially if you are holding on to those 4 and 5 value cards. But of course you can only ever have 4 left at the end of the game anyway, so you've got to be very careful about how you are using them and which cards you are collecting, which cards you are spending. But a really dynamic and exciting endgame scoring system there. Now, the hand management in this game is very strong, and particularly earlier in the game, you are somewhat overwhelmed with the decisions that you can make and how you are going to manage that hand of cards. Now, which ones are you going to spend? Which ones are you going to swap? When are you going to try and protect these cards that you are invested in? To not only grab those tokens, but also protect the suit that you are trying to help win at the table. When is it worth trying to weaken your or the other opponents or the other race's side by doing those pranks, by playing those matching numbers? Do you want to do it early and try and eliminate or make the other side weaker as early as possible? But doing that might prevent you from pulling the wool over your opponent's eyes by make it very clear that the suit that you want to win, and therefore they might want to try and piggyback off you and do the same thing. So definitely lots of kind of clandestine, lots of misleading and bluffing mechanisms going into this one. But I do like, as the game draws to an end, and bear in mind you are only playing 8 cards through the entire game, the clarity starts to become more and more clear, and you know what you want to do. And still the tension is really there because you're thinking, I've only got 4 cards I can keep back. Which ones do I want to play? I want to keep them all, but I can't. Especially in 2-player games when you have quite a good idea about what other cards your opponent has. And you can actually use that kind of deduction element of the game to your favour, but of course your opponent is doing the same thing, but without 100% clarity, or with the elimination of some cards at the beginning of the game. So lots of kind of synergizing, dynamic decisions being thrown at you at all times, always having to know when to pivot and switch from one side to the next, and so on. So yeah, decision-wise, and the hand management in this game is extremely strong, as you'd expect from a designer of this pedigree. Despite being on the higher end in terms of its complexity level of card games of this nature, maybe not necessarily in terms of rules overhead, but at least in the crunchiness of the decision making, the game does actually work at a very fast pace. You're just smashing down cards, they're going back and forth with those tokens, and again, you are only ever playing 8 cards in this game because you start with 13, you end up with 5. So again, your decision making is coming thick and fast. There's not really any scope to lose engagement. And despite the decisions being there, it does not drag its heels, and it still feels like a filler game. Do bear in mind that maybe the first learning game of this is going to be a little bit maybe the gears aren't going to flow so smoothly because some of the ideas here are a little bit different to some other games out there. But once you get the game flowing, once you've got a game or 2 under your belt, it's going to flow quite nicely, and you're not going to have much issue remembering the rules, etc. The player interaction is very solid in this game because, again, not only are you competing over these tokens, going back and forth with those, but also that final influence swing by keeping those cards in your hand means you have to think about what your opponent might have and what they might want to do. Additionally, of course, you are fighting over these communal cards, and sometimes you might be discarding something that your opponent actually wanted, so you have to be considerate of that as well. So all in all, this game has a constant thread of player interaction throughout. From a production standpoint, I think the game looks lovely. I love the art style. It has this kind of like fantasy autumnal aesthetic, which I think is super charming. Again, I have been completely reassured that the iconography will be a lot clearer in the final version, with these symbols being a lot bigger and, again, more easy to look at a glance, because you do need to know the race type quite easy, because it's not easily to cross-reference the two. The numbers are fine, but again, the borders on the cards are also important because it shows whether it's going to be the nighttime side or the daytime side of that particular battle. But again, with those small changes, I don't see any issue at all. Again, just make it a bit bolder so you can look at the game at a glance. Again, this box is going to be very different compared to the final box. Again, I will put the final artwork on the screen now so you can see what the cover will look like. And again, the final version will come with a board rather than these placement cards. But again, all in all, from a visual standpoint, I think it looks super cool and unique. Okay, so let's share some final thoughts on Mischief, and this is a very solid card game. I will put a strong caveat on it though, that I do think this is the kind of game for gamers. This is a gamer's card game. You're not going to have an easy time teaching this to very casual gamers, or even people on the periphery of the hobby. They're going to find it quite jarring to understand all those different mechanisms, with the protection mechanism, with the idea of swinging the influence, whether it's going to be a surprise scoring or the standard dance scoring. It's a little bit jarring at times, and it can be like you feel like you're pulling teeth in terms of drilling these rules into other players' heads. But if you are playing this with more seasoned gamers, I think it's going to flow relatively simply or easily once you get going and once you get over that initial learning curve. But this does, again, give me a similar feel to a game like Arboretum, but it does feel like a distinct game in its own right, especially with the back and forth battle over these tokens, protecting the cards and so on. And I really do like all the moving parts of this one, and the tight hand management. Only ever having 8 turns through the entire game is actually puts you on the spot and makes you, or forces you to make very crunchy decisions from the get-go. And sometimes you'll be mulling over your mistakes, thinking, I should have held onto that card, or I shouldn't give that card up to the invitational row where my opponent's just stolen it from me, and so on. So everything you do in this game matters, and it's very delicately balanced and based on how many cards or how many different tables are in the in play at any time. And I really do actually like this game at 2 players. I think it scales well. But I think 2 players is super cool because, again, you can start bringing the deduction style of thing into play as well, because you have quite a good degree of accuracy on what your opponent might be holding onto. And of course, as more and more cards are playing, that picture becomes even more clear, but not 100% clear because there are some cards taken out at the beginning of the game. But again, this is a gamer's game. If you have a big card game collection, I think this one could fit in quite nicely. If you like Arboretum, you're probably going to like this, but it's not going to be quite as easy to table for those reasons. But still, it's a solid design, and I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to play an early the game earlier than it has been released. So yeah, I do recommend it. Give it a look if you like these styles of card games, but be aware that it's not going to be the easiest game to teach to casuals or even people who play a lot of card games. They might find that first game or two a little bit jarring in terms of how many rules are thrown at you. Not necessarily complex rules, but maybe some rules that aren't so intuitive when you initially hear them, especially when you throw in some of the terminology of the surprises, of the dances, of the light side and the dark side, and the idea of doing things on the bounce and locking things into place and exceptions and so on. But still, I don't want that to sound like it's a mess of a game, because it's actually mechanically quite smooth. Just play a card and swap a card if you wish to. But again, those decisions do come thick and fast. in Mischief. So hopefully you have enjoyed the video. If you have, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel and check out my other content too. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye bye.